Today, I'll examine regulation as a force that shapes business behavior, decision-making, and opportunity. We'll consider both sides of the equation, the cost regulation can impose and the benefits it can create for businesses, consumers, and society. We'll also look at how regulation influences the balance of power between government and the private sector. The central idea is balance. Effective regulation must protect important interests without unnecessarily limiting innovation or economic activity. Understanding that tension is essential for every business leader. Business regulation is a framework of rules, laws, and standards that shapes how companies operate. It can influence everything from the way products are made to the way employees are treated. Three broad categories help organize these requirements. Economic regulation addresses prices, competition, and who can enter a market. Social regulation focuses on protecting public health, workplace safety, and the environment. Administrative regulation covers the practical obligations businesses must manage, including reporting, licensing, and ongoing compliance. Together, these forms of regulation define both the responsibilities and the boundaries of business activity. Markets are powerful tools, but they do not always produce fair or efficient outcomes on their own. Regulation exists to address those gaps. It can limit monopolies, account for harms such as pollution, and reduce the effects of unequal information. It also supports public goods that markets may underprovide, protects consumers who lack bargaining power or essential knowledge, and promotes social equity. In practical terms, regulation helps ensure that vulnerable people are not exploited, while preserving fair competition and protecting the broader public interest. Well-designed regulation creates value that reaches far beyond protecting individual consumers. It can strengthen entire industries, improve public health, reduce the cost of cleanup, and preserve benefits for future generations. $1 invested in environmental regulation returns an average of $30 in societal benefits, according to the studies cited here. That return reflects both better health outcomes and lower cleanup costs. The broader point is that effective regulation is not simply constraint. It can be a long-term investment in a healthier, more resilient society. Regulation can protect the public, but it also creates meaningful costs for businesses. Compliance requires investment in systems, employees, and processes, which can weigh especially heavily on smaller firms. There's also an administrative burden. Reporting, permits, and audits consume time and resources that might otherwise support growth. When rules become overly rigid, they may slow product development and discourage responsible risk-taking. Finally, companies in heavily regulated markets can face a competitive disadvantage, particularly when international rivals operate under less demanding standards. Regulation can protect the public, but also creates costs when rules are poorly designed or excessive. The first cost is higher consumer prices, because businesses often pass compliance expenses on to buyers. Second, licensing and other barriers can reduce market entry, protecting established firms while making it harder for new competitors to participate. The third concern is regulatory capture. Over time, regulators may become too influenced by the industries they oversee, which can shift rules away from the public interest and toward the advantage of powerful firms. This case study shows how regulatory failure can turn financial innovation into systemic risk. Loosened mortgage lending standards allowed toxic mortgage-backed securities to spread throughout the financial system, while deregulation encouraged institutions to take on excessive risk. The consequences reached far beyond Wall Street. More than 8 million jobs were lost, and households lost an estimated $19 trillion in wealth. In response, the Dodd-Frank Act of 2010 introduced sweeping new financial regulations, aiming to strengthen oversight and reduce the chance of another crisis on this scale. This framework helps evaluate regulation by moving from broad debate to a structured comparison. First, identify the market failure. What problem is a market not solving effectively? Next, quantify the benefits, such as lives saved, pollution reduced, or fraud prevented. Then measure the costs, including compliance burdens and potential effects on prices and innovation. Finally, compare the net outcome and ask the central question: do the benefits outweigh the costs? This cost-benefit approach helps policymakers and businesses make decisions based on evidence rather than ideology. Regulation exists on a spectrum, rather than as a simple choice between intervention and no intervention. Laissez-faire relies primarily on market forces, while self-regulation allows industries to establish their own standards, often with support from certification bodies. Smart regulation takes a targeted, evidence-based approach to specific market failures. At the most interventionist end, command and control uses strict mandates and significant government oversight. No single approach is universally superior. The right balance depends on the industry, the severity of the problem, and the social values shaping policy decisions. For business leaders, the message is clear. Regulation is not a background issue. It can reshape competitive landscapes just as powerfully as market trends. Anticipate change by monitoring the regulatory environment closely and identifying shifts early. Engage the process by participating in public comment periods and industry coalitions, helping shape rules that are both workable and fair. Finally, build compliance into operations from day one. Treating it as an afterthought usually means costly retrofitting, while designing with compliance in mind supports stronger, more sustainable execution. The central takeaway is that regulation corrects market failures, but every benefit carries potential costs. The right balance depends on context, including industry and social priorities. Business leaders must stay proactive, treating regulation as a strategic competency with the goal of optimal, not maximum or minimal, oversight.